Right now, the Orion spacecraft is on a 26-day journey. It will travel more than 1 million miles and orbit the moon before splashing back down on Earth on December 11th. Pam Melroy is the Deputy Administrator at NASA. Pam, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, in general, what's the significance of this Artemis mission? What does it really mean to you?
Well, as we approach the 50th anniversary of the last Apollo mission, Apollo 17, it's been more than 50 years since we've been to the moon, or it's approaching that. So this mission is actually about something very different than Apollo. We are creating a blueprint for humans to do science and exploration throughout the solar system. And we're going to practice it on the moon, and then we're going to go execute it on Mars and in other destinations. So this time we're going to stay and to do science. And Artemis 1 is just the beginning.
What's the data that you're collecting from this Artemis mission, this current one that's going on, and what have you learned so far?
This is a critically important mission. It's the first one, so we're really testing out the vehicle. We don't have crew on board for safety reasons, so we're going to push it a little bit harder than we would normally do if there was a crew on board, so that we can really understand the capabilities of the vehicle. First of all, we learned a lot from the rocket, the SLS rocket, which perfectly inserted Orion on its way to the moon. So that was a great experience, just getting it out to the pad a few times, figuring things out, getting to know the quirks of the rocket. So we've learned a lot about both procedures and the technology. For Orion so far, we're learning tons about the vehicle. We're exercising many of the systems, and of course we're going to learn a lot from the atmosphere around the moon. Now, we don't usually think of atmosphere around the moon, but in fact it is an environment, and there's solar wind, there's radiation. So if we're going to operate there on a routine basis, we really need to understand it.
Orion will reach a maximum distance from Earth of about 270,000 miles. That's a long way. What's the significance of that distance, and what are you hoping to learn?
Well, one of the things that we're doing on this mission is going very far beyond the moon, again, to understand the environment around the moon. We're going into a distant retrograde orbit around and basically understanding the environment. This will help us in the future with future orbital missions, with understanding space weather better. We really need to also test the vehicle in these extreme environments.
Tell me about the next phases of the Artemis project and the timeline for it.
Right, so we'll be landing, as you pointed out, on December 11th, so that will be a very critical test for the mission. We need to verify that at the extremely high Mach number and Gs of a moon reentry, that we can safely bring Orion back. And so that will be our last test point, and it will be a big one. After that, we're going to spend some time analyzing the data. We currently have hardware in work all the way through Artemis 5, our 5th mission. Our next flight is scheduled to be in 2 years, and then that will be the first crewed mission, and we will be announcing the crew for that next year.
You alluded to this earlier about having a human presence on the moon. Tell me a little bit more about that. How would that work? What would they be doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the most important thing they would be doing is science, because that's what we go to space for. We go to space for science, we also go for technical capability for our country, and we also go for inspiration. So everything we do, we need to be focused on maximizing those 3 areas. So the astronauts will be discovering new science, and as we've seen with the James Webb Space Telescope and Hubble and Mars Perseverance, how incredibly inspiring and the incredible things that we learn about our own Earth and about the solar system.
Tell me more about that, because you know space exploration is not cheap. Is this worth it to the American taxpayer, given all the other funding priorities that are really very valid?
Well, that's why we focus on those 3 areas. They're very, very important. Remember, every penny spent on the space program is spent right here on Earth. And so creating that technical capability, and the science and technology capability spills out into other areas and of course inspires the next generation in STEM. This is an investment in the future, and that's got to be made. So that the harder things are, the more valuable they are to the country.
Speaking of the next generation, you know, throughout the federal government, there's a need for hiring for STEM, especially for younger people and getting them interested in public service. Have you seen an uptick in interest and excitement among young people at NASA wanting to come into NASA because of the Artemis project?
Well, we're very fortunate at NASA that we have not ever had a problem recruiting. I think it's, you know, the best brand in the world, and the work that we do is very exciting. What I think the impact is going to be is more significant broadly across public service and also across STEM disciplines. Personally, I was hugely inspired by the Apollo program. A whole generation of scientists, engineers, aviators, and explorers were inspired. And that's what we're going to kick off with the Artemis program, the Artemis generation.
Any international cooperation in the Artemis program, or is this purely an American endeavor?
I can't begin to describe all the ways that Artemis is different from Apollo, but this is certainly a very significant one. We think that going out into the solar system, we really need to be going with our international partners. We are setting precedents with everything that we do. So we really need to have the right values in place, because how we go is as important as what we do when we get there. And so those international partnerships are critical. And right now the European Space Agency has contributed the service module to the Orion. We also have payloads from Israel, Germany, Italy, and Japan on board this very first flight. And we will see Canadians, Japanese, and other partners fly with us in the future.
Pam, Russia had announced that it is intention to leave the International Space Station. It hasn't yet. What's the current situation between NASA and Russia's space agency?
So Russia has also indicated that they prefer to have their own space station in place before pulling out of ISS. Which is clearly still several years away since they have not started constructing it. So right now we're in a very stable configuration. We have a very professional relationship with Russia. They've also indicated that they intend to completely fulfill all of the requirements that they have signed up for.
Are you concerned at all about China's space aspirations? They have completed a space station.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. We, obviously think that space exploration is incredibly important. Really, the only concern that we have is the lack of transparency in the Chinese space program. There's very little communications about the things that they are doing, and that leads to some concerns and questions about what their aspirations really are all about. Which means it's just really important for us to be as transparent as we can and to partner with other international partners who have the same values we do.
One of the A's in NASA is for aeronautics. So I want to ask you about the X-59 airplane.
This is very exciting. NASA is back in a big way in X-planes, which as a test pilot I think is extremely exciting. It's very hard to make huge leaps in aeronautics unless you can actually demonstrate something at scale, and you have to have an X-plane in order to do that. And the X-59 is going to make advances in supersonic aviation. Now, I think anybody who's made a trip from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States would be delighted to go in half the time, and that's what we're hoping to enable. Right now, it's not possible because of the sound of a supersonic boom. It rattles windows, it breaks windows, so it's not permitted. It's literally, it's not allowed by the FAA. So we would like to demonstrate a very strange shaped aircraft, fly it all over the country, knock on people's doors and say, "Did you hear anything?" We're hoping it sounds like a door slamming.
So when are we going to be able to fly in this airplane?
It's going to be exciting. This is an X-plane, so it's meant to demonstrate that the technology is possible, so then it can be scaled for commercial aviation. So the first flight will be next year.
COP27 just wrapped up. What is NASA doing for sustainable aviation technologies?
We're doing a lot for sustainable aviation. First of all, it's important to reduce emissions by improving the aerodynamics of an aircraft. So right now we've got an X-plane called X-57, which is solving some of the problems for all electric aircraft, but we're also taking the next step. Our next X-plane after the X-57 and the X-59 will be a sustainable flight demonstrator that will be able to reduce emissions just through the shaping of the aircraft and lightweighting it by about 25%.
What's the latest, Pam, on the James Webb telescope? It's still going strong.
I think we've only hit the tip of the iceberg on the James Webb Space Telescope. Obviously, the pictures that we see are very inspirational and they're exciting and awe-inspiring, but actually what it's all about is the science. Really being able to look back into the history of the universe. We're already seeing things that we had no idea. Just how did galaxies form? What were the first stars like out in the middle of the void? Really, it's just astounding when you think about it. I think the physics insights that we're going to get are amazing, but also the capability to look for life on other planets. I mean, really, if you talk about science, finding life in the universe, it's going to be transformational.
You're saying the James Webb telescope can show us that?
It can.
If it's out there?
It can look at other planets, at exoplanets, planets around other stars, and see the signatures of life.
The Perseverance Mars rover has been on the surface of Mars for coming up on 2 years. What's the plan? Is it just going to stay up there until it conks out on its own?
Well, we've had pretty good luck with our rovers living a lot longer, but yes, we expect it to stay up there in place. But in fact, it's part of a broader architecture. You may remember that it's collecting samples right now and in fact caching them and loading them up. And right now we're working with our European partners on a very daring Mars sample return in about a decade. A very complex program involving sending a vehicle to Mars, dropping a rover with a launch rocket, 2 helicopters like Ingenuity, pick up the cache of samples, and then for the first time launch a payload from the surface of another planet and catch it in space around Mars and then bring it back to the Earth.
Okay, because nothing's ever come back from Mars.
No, we've never had a sample come back from Mars. It's when you look at the riches of what we learned from the moon samples, and we know we'll learn more, Mars, it's going to be incredible.
It is, and thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing that with us, Pam.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.